I didn't even plan on hiking that weekend. It was one of those last-minute things where everything else fell through. My friends canceled a get-together, my internet was out, and I had too much on my mind. I'd been thinking too much about work, money, and everything else that piles up when life doesn't slow down. I needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere still. That's when I remembered this old place I read about once, Black Hollow Ridge. It wasn't well known, but I found a blog post about it years ago, buried in a forum. A guy had talked about hiking it solo, described it as quiet, underused, kind of eerie but beautiful. It wasn't far, maybe a 3-hour drive from where I lived. The blog didn't give exact directions, but I traced the path based on what he'd written and some old topographic maps. I packed light. One large hiking pack with a hydration bladder, snacks, a few protein bars, jerky, water purification tablets, my multi-tool, headlamp, phone with offline maps, an external battery, and a light tarp in case I had to sleep out. I wasn't planning to camp overnight, but I knew better than to go into the woods unprepared. I left early, before 6 a.m., and reached the gravel pull-off by mid-morning. It wasn't marked, just a wide shoulder on a narrow road where the forest hugged both sides. No other cars, no signs. The trail was more of a game path, faint and winding. As soon as I stepped into the forest, I felt the difference. The air was heavier, not hot, just still. The place felt like it hadn't been touched in years. Moss covered everything. Ferns grew up in thick walls along the trail. Pines stretched above like they were trying to hold in the sky. It was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no insects, not even the sound of wind in the trees. It wasn't comforting. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Still, I kept walking. That was the whole point. To be somewhere disconnected, somewhere away. The trail climbed slowly. A few hours in, I stopped for a snack. I hadn't seen a single person, not even a sign anyone had been here for a long time. No trash, no blazes on trees, no trail markers, just forest. Around midday, I reached a ridgeline. It wasn't very high, maybe a few hundred feet above the valley floor, but the slope was steep on both sides, with loose dirt and old shale sliding underfoot. I walked along it slowly, using my trekking pole to test the ground ahead. About 30 minutes down the ridge, I came across something strange. There was a boot, just one, half buried in the dirt off to the left. It was old and weather-worn, the sole curled up and cracked. No laces, looked like it had been there for years. I paused and scanned the area. There was no sign of anything else, no pack, no bones, no clothes. Just the boot, like someone took it off and left it there. I kept going. Eventually, the trail split. One part headed downward into what looked like a ravine, while the other followed the ridge deeper toward the woods. I took the ridge path. The forest got thicker the deeper I went. Trees grew closer together, and the underbrush was almost impossible to push through at some points. I had to duck and climb in sections. More than once, I lost the trail and had to circle back to pick it up again. The offline map didn't show much detail. It was based on old topography, and I could tell the trail I was on hadn't been used in years, maybe decades. Around late afternoon, I reached a rock outcrop that looked out over a small valley. I stopped to rest, took off my pack, drank some water, and sat on the edge of the stone. The view was decent, trees stretching all the way across the valley, the sun just starting to drop behind the far ridge. I could see a creek far below, weaving through the trees like a black ribbon. That's when I heard something. It was faint at first, like a low thud, then another. Then it stopped. I stood up and listened. Nothing, just silence again. Then, a few minutes later, more noise. This time it was closer. It sounded like something large moving through brush. Not a squirrel or deer, heavier. Slow steps, crunching twigs. Then silence. I scanned the trees but saw nothing. I decided to move on. I didn't want to be stuck out here in the dark. I checked my watch. Still enough time to circle back to the car if I moved quick. But the forest had a way of lying to you. Distances felt shorter until you tried to walk them again. About 20 minutes later, I lost the trail again. It wasn't the first time, but this time I couldn't find it again. Everything looked the same. I tried to retrace my steps, turned around, walked in the direction I thought I came from. Nothing matched. No markers, no footprints. Just trees, brush, rocks, and that heavy stillness. I used the sun's position to get my bearings, figuring east would lead me back toward the road. But clouds had started to move in, and the light got strange, flat and gray. Shadows stretched long. I checked my map and compass again, picked a direction and started walking. An hour later, I realized I was walking in circles. I found my own footprints in soft dirt. I recognized a fallen tree I passed earlier. I wasn't just turned around, I was lost. I sat down, calmed my breathing, and ate a protein bar. I told myself not to panic. I still had daylight. I had food, water, and gear. I could hunker down for the night if needed. But I hated the idea of sleeping out here. I tried climbing a hill to get a better view, but the forest was too thick. Every direction looked the same. No sign of the ridge, no creek, no trail. Then I heard it again. The same thudding, same heavy steps in the brush. Closer this time. I crouched behind a tree and waited. Whatever it was moving slow. I stayed quiet for several minutes, heart pounding. But nothing came into view. Eventually, the noise stopped again. I moved away quickly, heading downhill, hoping to reach the creek I saw earlier. It was my best chance of finding the valley floor and following it back toward civilization. It took another hour, but I finally heard water. I scrambled down a slope, slipping more than once, until I reached the stream. It was narrow and fast, running over rocks. I filled my bottle, purified the water, and drank. My legs were scratched up, and I had dirt in my socks. My shoulders ached, but I felt better with water nearby. I followed the stream for a while. It twisted and turned, and at times I had to climb over boulders and fallen trees. Then I found something that stopped me cold. There was a backpack wedged under a tree near the bank. It was old, faded, and covered in dirt. I pulled it out carefully. The fabric ripped when I tugged. Inside, I found a torn shirt, a broken flashlight, and a water bottle with holes in it. Nothing else. No ID, no phone, no sign of who it belonged to. I looked around again. Still no trail, no sign of camp. It didn't make sense. I wanted to leave it and keep going, but my gut told me something was wrong here. I kept walking, following the stream until the light began to fade. At some point, I knew I had to stop. It was too dark to keep moving safely. I found a flat patch near the creek, cleared some rocks, and set up a quick shelter using my tarp and paracord. I didn't make a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I ate a few bites of jerky, drank more water, and sat in the dark, listening. That night was the longest of my life. Every sound felt louder. Water trickling, branches creaking, something sniffing around in the brush at one point. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boot, that old pack, the stillness. By dawn, I was cold, sore, and exhausted, but I packed up and moved again. I kept following the creek for hours. I passed another old item, this time a rusted camp stove half buried in the mud, like the forest was slowly swallowing anything left behind. I checked my phone. Still no signal. Then I saw it way ahead across the creek. A thin line of what looked like old fencing. Metal posts half bent. Beyond it, a narrow road. I ran, slipped and fell in the water, scrambled up the other side, pushed through brush until I reached the road. It was paved but cracked. A utility road, maybe. I didn't care. I turned right and started walking. After nearly an hour, I heard the low hum of a vehicle. I waved as a county utility truck rolled up. The driver stopped, rolled down his window, looked at me like I'd crawled out of a war zone. He let me in. I told him where I'd parked, and he gave me a lift back. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time. When I finally got home, I reported what I saw. The pack, the boot, the stove. Gave GPS coordinates as close as I could remember. The sheriff's office took my report. Never heard back. I never found that blog again either. Like it had been deleted. I haven't gone hiking since. Not because I'm afraid of the woods. Because I'm afraid of what people leave behind in them. And who or what might still be out there watching from the trees. Not ghosts. Not monsters. just people. And started out like any normal hiking trip. I had time off work, and I'd been feeling stuck lately, mentally and physically. Too many days staring at a computer screen. Too many nights scrolling on my phone, thinking about everything I should be doing but wasn't. I needed to get away from it all, so I packed my bag, filled it with the basics: tent, sleeping bag, first aid kit, food, extra socks, water filter, and some energy bars. I picked a trail I hadn't done before, one that was supposed to be quiet, remote, and not too well known. It cut through the backcountry near the state border, stretching across miles of forest, steep climbs, narrow ridges, and valleys so deep they barely caught sunlight. I didn't tell many people, just my brother and one friend. I texted them the general area I'd be in and when I expected to be back, 5 days, maybe 6 at most. I parked at a gravel pull-off near the trailhead early in the morning, locked the car, slung on my backpack, and headed into the woods. The first day was peaceful. The trail wound through old pine forest, the air filled with the smell of sap and moss. Everything felt right. There were no signs of other hikers. I didn't see a single footprint besides my own. That's what I wanted: quiet, isolation, time to think. I hiked about 10 miles the first day, then set up camp beside a stream. I ate a cold meal of peanut butter tortillas and protein bars and then laid in my sleeping bag listening to the water. The air got cold quickly once the sun dropped, and the forest became darker than I expected. There was no moon that night, but I slept fine. No animals, no wind, just silence. On the second day, the terrain started changing. The trail got thinner. Trees became more spread out. The path climbed up toward a ridge. The forest floor was steeper and rockier, and I started having to watch every step. I didn't like how narrow the trail got. There were parts where it was only wide enough for 1 foot at a time, with sharp drops on both sides. I kept thinking one bad step could send me sliding down into the trees. About halfway through the second day, I passed a small clearing. It had an old fire ring made of blackened rocks. Someone had camped here before, but not recently. The ashes were faded and broken down, and the logs around the fire pit were soaked and half-rotten. I didn't stop there, just took note of it and moved on. I wanted to get up and over the ridge before dark. That's when things started going wrong. The trail was supposed to follow the ridgeline for a few miles, then curve down into a bowl-shaped valley where I could camp for the night. But the further I walked, the more the trail seemed to disappear. At first it was subtle, fewer markers, a bend that didn't match my map, but I brushed it off. I told myself I was probably just tired or not reading the terrain right. But by the time I stopped and checked my GPS, I knew I'd made a mistake. I was off the trail. Somehow I'd missed a turn, maybe back at the fire ring, maybe even earlier. And now I was on some kind of game path, a narrow thread of trampled grass and packed dirt that twisted along the ridge but didn't lead anywhere clear. I thought about turning around, but I didn't want to lose the daylight. The terrain ahead looked manageable, so I figured I'd cut cross-country, bushwhack down into the valley, and pick the trail back up at the bottom. It wouldn't be easy, but I had the tools: compass, GPS, enough food and water. I didn't realize how steep the slope was until I tried to go down. It looked gradual from the top, but once I stepped off the ridge, it felt like the ground was dropping straight beneath me. The dirt was loose and covered in pine needles, and every few feet I slipped. I had to grab onto small trees or rocks just to stay balanced. My pack kept shifting my weight, pulling me off center. I fell twice. Nothing serious, just scrapes and bruises. But the second time I landed hard on my hip, and it took me a minute to catch my breath. I sat on a rock, sweating, breathing heavy, hands shaking slightly. I hadn't eaten enough. My legs were tired. I told myself to stay calm. I pushed on, but the forest changed again. The trees got denser. The light started fading, not just because of the time, but because the valley was deep and narrow, the kind that barely sees sunlight. I checked my GPS, but now the signal was jumping. The screen flickered between coordinates. My compass needle spun briefly before settling. I kept hiking, hoping I'd reach a flat spot to set up camp. But the slope kept going. The ground became muddy, and soon I was walking in a shallow drainage full of moss-covered rocks. Every step was slick. I slipped again, caught myself on a root, and cut my palm. It was almost dark now. I couldn't keep moving without light, and I was nowhere near level ground. I had to stop. I cleared a small patch of ground between two leaning trees and set up my tent on a slope. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I filtered some water from a muddy trickle and forced myself to eat. My stomach was tight. I was starting to feel something I didn't want to admit, fear. That night, I didn't sleep much. The sounds of the forest felt different. Constant. Rustling, cracking branches, something splashing lightly in the distance. I told myself it was animals, squirrels, maybe a deer, but I didn't believe it. I didn't hear hooves or scurrying, just slow movement, like something big but quiet, pacing in the dark. I kept the knife beside my sleeping bag. I kept the headlamp on low. I kept telling myself I'd find the trail in the morning. Just get up, get moving, climb back up to the ridge if I had to. But a part of me was already panicking. I didn't know where I was. The third day was worse. I packed up and climbed uphill again, hoping to regain the ridgeline. But the forest was thick, tangled with brush, and the slope was even steeper than before. I burned through energy fast. My clothes were soaked with sweat, then dried with dirt. I started rationing water, not because I didn't have access, but because every time I filtered from the stream, it tasted off metallic, almost sour. I didn't trust it. By midday, I was exhausted and disoriented. I found an old deer skull wedged in a tree fork, clean, bleached by the sun, with no sign of the rest of the body. That unsettled me more than I expected. Felt like I was being watched, like something had put it there. I reached a point where the hill dropped sharply into another narrow valley. I stood at the top, trying to figure out my next move, when I heard movement behind me. Slow, heavy steps crunching through dry leaves. I turned quickly, heart hammering, but saw nothing. I stood frozen, listening. The sound stopped when I moved. I stayed completely still, and after a few seconds, it started again. Closer, just behind a thick stand of pines. Not crashing like a bear, not skittering like a deer, just one slow step at a time. I didn't wait. I ran. I scrambled down the slope, barely controlling my descent. I fell again, scraped my knee, tore my sleeve. I didn't stop moving until I hit the bottom and forced myself through a tight space between rocks. I hid there for almost an hour, heart racing, sweat freezing on my skin. Nothing followed me, but the silence felt heavier now, like something was holding its breath. I kept going until I found a dry patch beneath a rock overhang. I set up camp again, even though it was only mid-afternoon. I couldn't move anymore. My legs were shaking, my hands numb. I ate whatever I could force down and kept my back to the rock wall all night. No sleep that night either. I kept hearing faint footsteps, always far enough away to question, but close enough to keep me awake. I didn't move. I just waited for the sun. On the fourth day, I gave up trying to find the trail. My only goal was to head in one direction, south. I figured if I kept moving in a straight line, I'd eventually hit a road or a river or something. Anything. The terrain didn't let me. Ridges blocked my path. The forest folded in on itself. Fallen trees, gullies, cliffs. I had to backtrack multiple times. I started to get blisters on both heels. My socks were soaked through. My boots squished when I walked. I felt lightheaded, dizzy. I rationed the last of my real food and started chewing tree bark just to keep my mouth busy. Late in the afternoon, I came across something strange. A fence. Old, rusted, maybe 10 feet long, ending at a steep drop. It wasn't connected to anything. No building, no path, just a piece of metal fence stuck in the ground. There were claw marks on it, deep, rust-flaked gouges. That scared me more than anything else so far. I didn't know what kind of animal would do that. I walked around it and moved on, but I couldn't stop thinking about those marks. They looked deliberate. That night, I slept for maybe an hour, curled up under a fallen log. I woke up to a sound I'll never forget. Something breathing. Not animal breathing. Human breathing. Raspy, wet, right outside where I lay. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. It stayed there for almost 10 minutes, just breathing. Then it was gone. I didn't know what was worse, that it was real or that I might have imagined it. I had been planning the solo hike for months. I had time off work, and I wanted to be far away from the noise of everything. Phones, traffic, even other people. I picked a national forest area a few states away that was known for being less visited than the more popular parks. It was deep in the mountains, full of crisscrossing trails that stretched for miles, and had a reputation for being wild, raw, and empty. I brought everything I thought I'd need. A sturdy pack, water purification tablets, 2 collapsible water bottles, a lightweight tent, sleeping bag, trail food, maps, compass, GPS watch, headlamp, extra batteries, first aid kit, bear spray, even a personal locator beacon. I wasn't careless or new to hiking. I had done multi-day hikes before. I was cautious. I told a friend the general area I'd be in and when I'd check back in. The plan was to start at a trailhead near a gravel forest road and do a 4-day loop that went up to a ridge with amazing views, down through a remote river basin, then back around through switchbacks to the trailhead. The loop was about 48 miles long. It was hard but manageable. I wanted to push myself a little. The first day went well. The air was cooler than expected but not too bad. The trail climbed steadily uphill, winding through thick woods, patches of mossy rock, and then some more open areas where I could hear the wind moving through the trees above. I passed a few sets of boot prints, older ones, maybe a couple days old. No fresh ones. No sounds of voices, no planes, no cars. Just quiet. That night, I camped near a creek about 10 miles in. I set up my tent on level ground, made sure I wasn't too close to the water or in any kind of runoff path, ate and went to bed. I slept well. No animals, no strange noises. Just wind and the occasional drip of water from the trees. The second day started strong. I followed the map toward the ridge. The trail climbed sharply, with tight switchbacks and thick undergrowth crowding the path. I had to bushwhack around some blowdowns, trees that had come down during storms, I guess. My pace slowed a little, but I didn't mind. The higher I climbed, the better the views. By late afternoon, I was walking along a narrow ridge trail with steep drop-offs on both sides and panoramic views of the mountains in every direction. I could see layers of blue ridges stretching out forever. It was breathtaking. I made camp in a clearing near the top, where some flat rocks formed a sort of natural platform. It looked like others had camped here before. There was a blackened fire ring, some chopped wood nearby. I stayed warm, watched the sunset, and tried to soak in the silence. Still no signs of anyone else. It felt like I had the entire mountain to myself. But that night, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even necessarily threatening. It was just off, like a branch snapping, but closer to the tent than it should have been. I laid still and listened, holding my breath. A second noise, like a footstep on leaves. Then nothing. I stayed awake for a while, gripping the canister of bear spray and listening hard. No more sounds came. Eventually, I must have drifted off. In the morning, everything seemed normal. Nothing disturbed. No tracks. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a deer. Still, I packed up a little faster than usual and headed out. That was when I took the wrong turn. At a junction, the trail marker had fallen over. There were 2 paths. One sloped gently downhill, the other kept climbing. I remembered that the map showed the ridge trail continuing a bit farther before it descended, but I wasn't 100% sure. I chose the downhill one. First, it was fine. The path was worn and looked used. It dropped through thick woods and stayed relatively clear. But after an hour or so, it began to narrow. More branches blocked the way. It didn't feel like a maintained trail anymore. I pulled out the GPS and map. My location wasn't matching anything exactly, but I was still within the general area. I figured the trail might reconnect farther down. That's where I made my mistake. I kept going. The farther I went, the less it felt like a trail. It became overgrown, slanted, and slippery. I slid a couple times on loose dirt and small rocks. The air felt cooler, wetter. Light didn't get through as easily. Everything seemed just a little too still. Then I found the tarp. It was draped between 2 trees, camo green, low to the ground like a makeshift shelter. It looked old, edges curled, bits of leaves caught in the folds, but not abandoned. There were boot prints in the dirt, flattened areas in the grass where someone had been lying or sitting. No gear, no food wrappers, just the tarp and some nylon rope tied haphazardly to the trees. I didn't go closer. I just stood and stared at it for a long time. Something about it felt wrong. Not like a hiker's emergency shelter. It looked lived in, but empty in a way that didn't feel normal. I backed away slowly. I turned around and started hiking back the way I came. But I couldn't find the same path again. It didn't make sense. I was sure I was retracing my steps, but the trees looked different and the slope was wrong. I couldn't see my earlier footprints anymore. I circled back, tried different angles, used my compass, checked the GPS, but the signal was fading now. The ridge must have blocked the satellite. The watch just spun and reset. I was officially off trail. It was still early in the day, so I told myself I'd hike back uphill until I found the junction again. But an hour passed, then two. I was sweating hard now, my legs sore from the uneven ground. Every step felt like I was going deeper into something. Not a trail, not even a game path. Just forest. Dark, dense forest. I took a break on a rock outcropping and ate something. That's when I noticed the tree. It had a carving in the bark. Letters. Rough, uneven. Looked like it had been done with a knife. It just said, "Run." My stomach dropped. I stood up and looked around. No sounds, no movements. But the forest suddenly felt like it had eyes. I started moving faster. Not running, but a quick, controlled pace. I kept my bear spray in hand. I checked my watch. Almost 3 p.m. I needed to find a place to set up before dark. I didn't want to bushwhack in the dark. I came across a small clearing, maybe 20 feet wide. It was enough room to set up the tent. I kept the fly off so I could see the sky, such as it was through the canopy. That night, I heard the footsteps again, more than once. I laid still in the sleeping bag, breathing as quietly as I could. The steps were light, not animal sounds. These were human, careful, deliberate, moving around the tent but never touching it. At one point, I held my breath and waited, spray canister gripped in both hands. The steps stopped. Then I heard breathing. Low, slow breathing, just on the other side of the tent wall. I didn't sleep at all. When the first light came, I got up, packed as fast as I ever had, and started moving. I didn't know where I was going anymore. The map was useless here, GPS still out. I just kept the sun to my left and kept walking. Sometimes I climbed ridges just to see over the tree line, hoping to catch sight of something. Anything. A road, smoke, anything. I didn't find that, but I did find something else. A tree stump, freshly cut, clean, not rotted. There were wood chips on the ground, and a hatchet stuck into a log nearby. Old, rusty, but clearly used recently. I didn't touch anything. I backed away, kept moving. I was deep into day 3 now, and food was running low. I had granola, a few protein bars, a packet of jerky. Water wasn't a problem. I found small streams and used my filter, but I was exhausted. My legs hurt. My ankles ached from walking uneven ground all day. Scratches covered my arms from pushing through branches. I could feel a blister on my left heel. Then I started seeing more signs. Bits of rope hanging from trees. A glove torn and stuck on a branch. A piece of duct tape stuck to bark. These weren't trash from hikers. These looked placed. Intentionally. Once, I passed a tree with a dead squirrel hanging from it, tied by its tail. Its body was stiff, bloated. Its eyes were gone. I didn't know where I was anymore. I just wanted out. That evening, I decided not to set up the tent. I crawled beneath a fallen tree and used the sleeping bag as a cover. I figured it was better to be less visible. I didn't even eat. I just laid there, completely still. And again, I heard the footsteps. Only this time, I saw something. A figure. Just a silhouette, maybe 50 feet away. Standing still. Watching. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My eyes burned from staying open. Eventually, the figure stepped back into the trees and was gone. First light, I ran. I didn't care what direction. I just ran. I followed every downhill slope, every sound of running water. I scraped my shins on rocks, twisted my ankle once, kept going. Around noon, I found the road. It was a dirt road, probably for maybe I was tired of the noise in the city, or maybe it was just that I needed something that felt real for once. Something physical, not digital or artificial. I didn't even tell many people about my plan because I didn't think it was worth mentioning. I had done long hikes before, though not usually solo. This time I wanted to see what it was like to rely only on myself. The area I picked wasn't anything legendary or Instagram famous. It was a stretch of rough country near the Idaho-Montana border, close to the Bitterroot Mountains. The maps showed a place called Martin's Ridge, a long spine of rock and loose soil that ran above a valley carved by glacial runoff, and then dipped down into thick pine and alder forests. A couple of old hiking forums I'd read said that the trails were unmaintained, some marked only by faint cairns or old flagging tape. That's exactly what drew me in. I didn't want something polished. I wanted something raw. I parked my car on a gravel pull-off, the kind where you don't really know if it's legal or not but hope no one cares. From there, I started the slow climb through scattered trees and dry undergrowth, following what was more of a game trail than anything else. The air smelled like dust and pine sap. There weren't any signs, no friendly markers, no welcoming plaques. Just rocks, trees, the sound of my boots scuffing earth, and a few birds calling out now and then. I had a 70-liter backpack with me, maybe heavier than it needed to be, but I didn't want to run short on anything. I packed a tent, a lightweight sleeping bag, a basic first aid kit, water filter, a small pot and stove, and enough food for 4 days. I also had a printed topographic map and a GPS unit. I had checked the weather repeatedly, and the forecast looked calm. No storms, just mild summer days with cool nights. Felt like everything was lined up perfectly. The first few miles went by without anything unusual. The climb was steady, and the heat kicked in by noon. I was sweating heavily, and the straps of my pack started rubbing my shoulders raw, even through the padded mesh. I stopped once in a while to take in the view. Down below, the trees looked like a rippling carpet. The ridge itself was still a mile or two ahead, but I could see the shadow of it rising in the distance. Long, narrow, and sharp-edged. By late afternoon, I reached the start of the ridge. From there, the trail became something else entirely. It narrowed to a few feet wide with steep drops on either side. To the left was a slope of jagged rocks that fell into a dry ravine. To the right, it was all pine forest, but steep, like a wall of green sloping down in a way impossible to climb back up if you fell. I thought about turning back, not because I was scared, but because I felt like this wasn't a place for mistakes. If something happened up here, an injury, a slip, a wrong step, there was no one to call, but I kept going. I walked that ridge with my body stiff and careful. Every step mattered. I had my trekking poles out, testing the dirt ahead of me. Some sections were solid rock, others were loose shale that gave slightly under my weight. The wind started picking up, and it came from the north, pushing across the ridge sideways. I leaned into it, adjusting my balance every few steps. I kept walking, focused on nothing but the ground in front of me. The sun was starting to dip behind the peaks, throwing long shadows across the trail. I knew I needed to find a flat spot to set up camp before dark. I didn't want to be walking this ridge under moonlight. Around 7 in the evening, I came across a slight widening of the trail, a spot just big enough to fit my tent if I angled it right. On one side was a rock wall, maybe 8 feet tall, and on the other was a sharp drop into the forest below. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best I'd seen. I took off my pack, unrolled the tent, and started setting up. My hands were shaking from a mix of exertion and nerves. The wind didn't help. It tugged at the tent fabric and made everything harder than it had to be. Once the tent was up, I heated water for dinner, just a freeze-dried meal I poured boiling water into. I sat with my back to the rock wall, staring out over the forest while I ate. It was dead quiet. No traffic sounds, no planes overhead, not even much bird activity. Just wind. Night came quickly, and I zipped myself into the tent as the air cooled. I lay there, listening to the fabric of the tent rattle in the breeze. I kept a knife near my sleeping bag, not because I thought I'd need it, but because it made me feel better. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. It wasn't cold enough to shiver, and I didn't need to pee. I just snapped awake, heart pounding. There was a noise, faint but close, not an animal stepping through brush, more like a short scraping sound, like stone sliding against stone. It stopped as soon as I became aware of it. I held my breath, listening, then silence. I convinced myself it was probably just a rock that had come loose nearby. Wind and erosion could do that, but something about it felt off. I stayed awake for another hour, listening to nothing, before finally drifting back to sleep. The next morning, I felt sluggish. I hadn't slept enough. I packed up quickly and kept moving. The ridge went on for another mile before it sloped downward again toward the valley. That's where the trail more or less disappeared. I had to rely on the topographic map and GPS. The goal was to loop around the valley floor and rejoin a trail on the far side that would lead me back toward my car. But once I got down there, nothing looked like the map said it would. The stream bed was dry when it shouldn't have been. The forest felt too dense. Some landmarks didn't match. I double-checked the GPS and thought maybe I had just dropped too low into the valley. I started climbing again, trying to angle northwest to meet back up with the planned route. The brush got thicker, and the incline was steeper than I expected. I was sweating through my shirt by mid-morning. Every branch seemed to grab at me, slowing me down. Flies kept landing on my face. By noon, I had a bad feeling in my gut. I sat down on a flat rock and pulled out the GPS again. This time, it wasn't working. No signal. I checked my phone just to be sure, no service. I pulled out the paper map and compass and tried to orient myself using the sun and the terrain. I couldn't make sense of it. Every time I thought I was moving in the right direction, I'd crest a hill and find a completely different view than expected. No trail, no river, no landmarks I recognized, just more forest and more uneven ground. I kept walking, hoping I'd hit something eventually. Around 3 p.m., I twisted my ankle. It happened stupidly. I stepped on what looked like solid ground, but it was a patch of moss over a hole between two rocks. My left foot dropped suddenly, and I felt something snap. Not broken, but bad enough to make me collapse. I shouted into the trees out of frustration. The pain was sharp, and my foot started swelling almost immediately. I wrapped it tightly with a bandage and elevated it for a while, sitting with my back against a tree. I could still put weight on it, but barely. I couldn't stay there. I had one night left of food. I had to keep moving. I limped forward, using one trekking pole as a crutch. I was slower now, each step careful. The terrain only got worse. Thicker, rockier. Dead trees covered the forest floor like giant matchsticks. I passed a sun-bleached animal skull near a dry stream bed. Looked like a deer, maybe, but all the bones were scattered, like something had been chewing at them. I set up camp early that night. The sun was still out, but I couldn't go on much longer with my ankle the way it was. I found a slightly level spot under a leaning pine and made camp. I didn't even cook, just ate a protein bar and some trail mix. That night, I heard the scraping sound again, closer this time. Stone on stone, then twigs snapping. Several, not one or two. It sounded like something walking nearby. I froze inside the tent, staring up at the nylon ceiling like it could protect me. I could feel my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't breathe. Whatever it was, it didn't make any other sounds. No growls, no snorting, just movement, then silence. It didn't come closer. After an hour, I finally unzipped the tent and peered out. Nothing, just trees, cold air. But something had changed. A rock had been placed near the tent. Not a big one, just the size of a fist. But I was sure it hadn't been there before. I didn't sleep. The next day, I pushed through the pain and kept going. I followed a shallow ravine that led downhill. My ankle throbbed with every step, and I could feel the blisters on my heels tearing open. Around noon, I saw something man-made. A broken fence post, half buried in moss. It gave me hope. 15 minutes later, I found an old logging road. grass had grown over it, but the shape was still there, two tire ruts stretching into the distance. I almost cried. I followed that road for hours. It twisted through the forest like a lifeline. Late that evening, I saw the first sign of civilization. An old shack, collapsed in on itself, probably used decades ago by loggers. Before this happened, I used to tell people that solo hiking was peaceful, meditative. I liked going deep into the woods alone. I liked the quiet, the fresh air, and being away from all the noise. I didn't go to popular parks or marked trails. I preferred places that felt untouched, raw forestland, usually out in the northern parts of Montana or Idaho. I take my time out there. I had a good setup, an old 4Runner I turned into a sleep pod, a satellite phone, paper maps, a GPS, food, water filtration, all of it. I wasn't reckless. I just liked the silence. This trip was supposed to be the same. It was late September, and the air had started getting cold in the early mornings. The plan was to hike along a little-known ridgeline about 30 miles north of Thompson Falls, Montana. I'd done part of the ridge the year before, but I wanted to try a deeper section this time. I'd park near a service road I had marked, hike in about 15 to 18 miles with my gear, camp out a night or two, and loop back using another route that reconnected to the road. That first day started like any other. I parked near a forestry gate, locked up the 4Runner, double-checked my gear, and set off with a light pack. I had layers, my tent, a week's worth of dehydrated meals, a knife, bear spray, a .38 snub revolver, and my Garmin GPS. I logged my location on the satellite beacon and headed north. The trail was barely marked, mostly just flattened foliage from deer and the occasional hunter. It had rained the week before, and I could still feel the dampness in the moss under my boots. Everything smelled clean. Pine and cedar. Birds chirped, squirrels scattered. It was calm. By late afternoon, I was about 12 miles in. I reached a flat clearing with just enough space between some boulders to pitch a tent. It wasn't the exact place I'd planned to stop, but the light was fading faster than I thought it would, and the terrain ahead looked steep. I set up camp, made a small hot meal, and crawled into the tent. I read a few pages of a book and listened to the wind picking up. It whistled softly through the trees. No signs of other people, no sounds of traffic or even planes. Just the forest. The kind of silence you can only get when you're truly deep out there. The next morning, I woke up early. Cold air filled my lungs as I unzipped the tent. I walked over to a small rise to relieve myself and stood for a second, scanning the forest. That's when I saw it. A shape, about 200 yards downhill, just beyond a dense patch of trees. There was movement. I thought maybe it was a deer, but it wasn't moving right. Too slow, too careful. I stared hard and finally caught a glimpse of fabric. Camo maybe. Person. That was strange. No one else should have been out here. It was private timberland, and the ridge didn't connect to any major trail systems. Maybe a hunter? I watched for another few minutes, but the person didn't move any closer. I packed up quickly, made sure I didn't leave anything behind, and hiked fast toward the ridge. I figured if someone was hunting illegally or doing something sketchy, I didn't want to be anywhere near them. About 3 hours later, I crested a high ledge and found a narrow path that followed the ridgeline. It was a good spot to pause. I ate a protein bar, looked over the edge, and froze. Way below me, in a shallow basin carved out by time, was something I didn't expect to see. Tents. 3 of them. Large canvas ones. The kind outfitters use. And next to them were tarps, coolers, and what looked like animal cages. At least 6 of them. From that far up, I couldn't see what was in them, but they were definitely cages. Some were moving. There were men, too. At least 4 that I could see. 2 of them were dragging something large and limp across the ground. The way they were moving told me it was heavy. I used the zoom on my GPS unit's camera and snapped a few photos, but even zoomed in, it was hard to make out details. Something didn't feel right. My gut was tight. I sat up there watching for about 15 minutes, until I saw one of the men stop and point in my direction. I froze. I was too far to be seen clearly, or at least I thought so, but then he motioned again. Another man walked over to him. They both stared uphill. Then one of them raised a pair of binoculars. I didn't wait. I dropped down behind the ledge and started moving fast back toward the tree line. My heart was racing. I didn't know what I had stumbled across. Poachers maybe, or something worse, but I knew I shouldn't be there. The next few hours were a blur. I kept moving, sometimes off trail, trying to loop south without going back the way I came. I checked my GPS. The route I wanted to use as a loop was about 7 miles away, through dense timber and elevation. I decided to make for that point, even though I'd lose the trail and probably have to bushwhack most of it. The woods started to change. Less light came through the canopy. The ground was softer. Animal trails were everywhere, but no human signs. I moved fast, but quiet. I stopped only to drink water and catch my breath. My ears were tuned to every sound. My fingers kept brushing my bear spray and the revolver. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I stopped to rest. I sat under a large pine, pulled out some jerky, and listened. That's when I heard something faint behind me. Not branches breaking, but a soft rhythm, like footsteps, slow and cautious. I held my breath, waited. Nothing. I turned to keep moving, and that's when I saw it. A boot print, fresh, clear in the damp earth. Not mine. It was larger than mine, and the tread pattern didn't match my boots. Someone was following me. I picked up my pace. I didn't run, but I moved fast. I knew that if I panicked and made noise, they'd hear me. I wanted to believe it wasn't connected, maybe another hiker, maybe a hunter, but in my gut, I knew. Someone saw me up on that ledge. The sun dropped fast. By the time I hit the halfway point to the route I wanted, it was almost dark. I couldn't camp. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I had to keep going. Around 7 p.m., I reached a dry creek bed and started following it east. It was tough, filled with loose rocks and steep sides, but it kept me off any visible trail. I thought I was alone again. For a while, the forest went silent. No birds, no wind, just my own footsteps and breathing. Then I smelled something. Smoke. Faint, but it was there. With smoke. I turned off the creek and started climbing the hill beside me. I moved slow, crouching low, stepping carefully. About halfway up, I saw light. A fire. Another camp. But this one was different. Small. Just one tent. A blue one, maybe a 4-person size. The fire was low, more embers than flame. No one in sight. But someone had been there recently. Gear was scattered around. A cooking pot. A knife stuck in a stump. A backpack. I stayed low and watched. 10 minutes passed. Nothing moved. I crept closer. Still nothing. I moved around to the front of the tent and pulled my flashlight from my vest. I clicked it on for just a second, sweeping it across the tent's entrance, and stopped. The zipper was cut open. Clean slice. Not torn, sliced. Inside, the sleeping bag was shredded. Not just opened, shredded. Stuffing everywhere. A water bottle crushed. The inside of the tent smelled like urine and blood. I turned off the flashlight and backed away, heart hammering in my throat. I didn't know who had been there, but I knew I couldn't stay. I kept moving through the night. At some point around 1 a.m., I found a rocky outcrop that gave me some elevation. I climbed up, laid low behind a boulder, and wrapped myself in a thermal blanket. I didn't sleep. I just listened. All night. Every sound made me jump. Owls, wind, shifting branches. I gripped the revolver tight in my hand. By morning, I was exhausted, sore, and still deep in the forest. I turned on my GPS and found that I was only 3 miles from the service road. The trail I had planned to use was just ahead. I kept moving, slower now, checking over my shoulder every 10 steps. By noon, I could hear faint sounds. Maybe an engine, a distant hum. I knew the road wasn't far. Then I saw it. Not the road. A man, standing just off the trail, about 40 yards ahead, dressed in camo, holding a rifle. He hadn't seen me yet. I dropped to my stomach, crawled behind a fallen log, and watched. He didn't move, just stood there, watching the trail, waiting. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't go back. Couldn't go forward. So I waited. 30 minutes passed. Then I heard another sound, Footsteps. To my left. I stayed low and peeked over the log. Another man, also in camo, also armed. They were watching the trail, looking for me. I crawled backwards slowly, silently, heart racing so hard I thought they could hear it. I veered off the trail, using deer tracks and low brush to stay hidden. I moved around them wide, maybe a quarter mile, and looped back toward where I thought the road was. Took 2 hours, but eventually I didn't plan on hiking that day, at least not far. I was only out to stretch my legs a little after driving nearly 6 hours across the state. I had pulled off a small back road near the edge of a national forest. There wasn't any cell signal, but I had paper maps in my glove compartment and figured I'd just hike a few miles to get some air before dark, then drive into the next town and find a motel for the night. That was the plan. I parked on the side of a narrow gravel turnout. No signs, no other vehicles, just trees and a single trail cutting off through the woods. It looked well used. No gates, no warnings. The kind of place locals probably used often but didn't advertise. I grabbed my backpack out of the trunk. I didn't pack heavy, just a single bottle of water, a light jacket, my map, and a flashlight just in case. It was late afternoon, maybe around 4. The sun was still high, and the weather was dry and mild. I figured I had a good couple hours of daylight. I'd hike an hour in, then turn back. The trail started flat and peaceful, mostly pine forest. The dirt was dry and well-packed from years of foot traffic. Birds chirped lazily. There were no dramatic climbs, no steep sections, just a slight incline here and there. I walked slowly, enjoying the quiet. No highway noise, no hum of cities, just wind in the trees and the crunch of my boots. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the trail split. One path curved left and downhill toward what looked like a creek bed. The other veered right and began a more obvious climb. There were no markers, no colored blazes, nothing to say which trail was official. I picked the ridge trail going up, figuring I might get a decent view if I gained enough elevation before heading back. It didn't take long for the climb to get steeper. I stopped a few times to catch my breath and drink water. The trail narrowed, and the brush got thicker on both sides. I saw some deer tracks in the dust, maybe raccoons too. The smell of pine got sharper the higher I climbed. The sun filtered through the trees in long beams, and for a while it was actually really peaceful. Maybe 45 minutes later, the trail leveled out again. I reached a rocky ledge where I could see across the tree line to the opposite hills. The view wasn't spectacular, but it was enough. The trees had started to thin up there, and I could see down into the basin I had come from. I stood there for a while, letting the wind dry the sweat on my back. When I finally turned to head back, I noticed the trail looked different going the other way. It always happens. Trails look clear heading in, then twisted and unfamiliar when you're turned around. I started down what I thought was the same path I came up. The slope was similar. The trees looked familiar, so I followed it. But something was off. After about 10 minutes of descent, I didn't recognize anything. There was no log I had stepped over earlier, no narrow bend where I had stopped to drink water. I paused and looked around. I couldn't see the ledge anymore, and now the trail looked more overgrown than I remembered. I thought maybe I had just missed a turn. I checked my map, but it didn't even show the trail I was on. It was too rough and local, not part of the mapped routes. I turned around and went back up to the last spot I remembered clearly. But when I got back to the top ridge, I couldn't find the split. The forest seemed thicker. I walked back and forth along the crest, scanning for that earlier fork in the trail, but it all looked the same now, just trees and dirt and dry grass. That's when I felt it. Not panic, not yet, but that first tightness in my chest. That small thought that maybe I wasn't where I thought I was. I took out my water again, drank slow, and told myself it was just disorientation. Trails always get weird in late daylight. I picked the clearest direction downhill, assuming it would bring me back toward the creek and maybe the road. I moved slow, watching for trail signs, old markers, even old trash, anything human. But there was nothing. The forest got denser and the slope sharper. I slipped once on loose gravel, sliding a few feet and scraping my palm on a stone. My flashlight jostled in my bag. I kept going. Another 30 minutes passed, maybe more. It was hard to tell. The sun had dropped lower, and the trees blocked a lot of the remaining light. It had gone from golden yellow to dull gray. My legs were getting sore, and my hands stung. The trail was gone now. I wasn't even on a trail, just animal tracks or runoff channels. Still, I thought I'd eventually pop out on a logging road or something. Then I heard the sound, a heavy crack like a branch snapping. I froze. It wasn't close, but it was loud. Something big, at least the size of a person. Maybe an elk or a black bear. I scanned the woods around me. Nothing moved. No fur, no shapes, just trees and low brush. I kept going, slower now, constantly turning to check behind me. Then I slipped again. My foot caught on a root I didn't see, and I pitched forward hard, landing on my side. My backpack caught most of the fall, but my shoulder slammed into a rock. I grunted and lay there for a second. My chest was heaving. The air felt colder now. I got up, wincing. My flashlight had bounced out and was lying a few feet away. I picked it up and realized how dark it had become. I turned it on. The beam was strong and cut through the gloom. I swept it around the trees. Everything looked the same, but now it all felt sharper, darker, more alive. That's when I finally admitted I was lost. Not confused, lost. I had no signal, no working trail, and no daylight left. I checked my map again, but it was useless. Nothing matched. I had wandered too far off whatever trail I had started on. I needed to find shelter, fast. I kept walking, shining my light at the ground, trying not to trip. The woods grew colder, the silence heavier. Not even birds now, just the crunch of my own feet. Then I saw it, a flash of something metallic in the beam. I moved toward it, pushing branches aside, and found an old rusted fence. Barbed wire, sagging, mostly broken. Beyond it, the trees cleared into a small, overgrown clearing, and in the middle stood a collapsed wooden structure. It looked like an old shed or hunting cabin, maybe decades old. Half the roof was gone. One wall had fallen in, but it was shelter. I stepped through a gap in the fence and moved closer. The clearing was full of thorns and tall, dry weeds. I pushed through and ducked inside what was left of the structure. The inside smelled like mold and rot. There were old tools, rusted and broken, and an iron stove in the corner, long dead. I sat on what remained of a bench and rested. My shoulder throbbed. My water was half gone. My flashlight flickered once but stayed on. I stayed there for a while, trying to calm down. My plan was to wait until morning. No point in wandering in pitch dark. I could follow the slope down at first light. Maybe find the creek. Maybe find the road again. It wasn't ideal, but it was the safest move. But then I heard it again. Another crack. Closer. This time, the noise didn't stop. I heard movement. Leaves shifting. Something circling the clearing. Heavy steps. Not fast. Not charging. Just steady pacing. I turned off my light and crouched behind the broken wall. Heart pounding. The woods outside were pitch black now. My ears strained. Another crack. Then a long pause. Then another step. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then the noise faded. Whatever it was, it moved off. I didn't sleep. At some point, the cold got so bad I had to pace in place to stay warm. I tried not to use my flashlight too much. I didn't want to attract attention. My legs cramped. My shoulder ached. My stomach growled. But I waited and waited until finally I saw the first light of dawn. It was faint, barely a gray smear in the sky, but it was enough. I grabbed my bag and left the clearing fast, heading straight downhill. No more detours, no more ledges or views, just down. Hours passed. My legs burned. My lips cracked. I ran out of water. My flashlight was dead. But around midday, I heard something far off, through the trees. A low hum, a motor. I moved toward it, crashing through the brush, following the sound. Finally, I burst out onto a logging road, dirt wide with deep tire ruts. The hum was a truck, maybe 2 miles off. I waved my arms and ran. Eventually, a forestry crew picked me up. They were doing tree maintenance in the area. I told them I got turned around. They gave me water, radioed it in, and gave me a ride back to my car. When I finally got to my vehicle, it was still there. No ticket, just dust covered. The whole trip had lasted less than 24 hours, but it felt like a week. The area I had hiked into wasn't on most maps because it had been part of an old mining claim years ago. The trails weren't maintained, and the clearing I found used to be a hunting shack from the 1940s. No one used it now. I don't tell many people this story, not because I'm afraid they won't believe me. There's nothing unbelievable in what happened. It's not supernatural. There were no ghosts, no monsters hiding in the woods, and nothing jumped out at me from behind a tree. But it still felt like something crawled under my skin that day and stayed there, like a cold warning that some places aren't meant to be visited alone. I was 29 at the time, recently laid off from my job at a design firm. My girlfriend had just broken up with me too, so I wasn't in the best place emotionally. I needed to get away from the city, from the noise, from everything. So I packed up a few things, loaded my backpack, and decided to go hiking into the southern part of the Cascades, somewhere remote in Oregon. I had done hikes before, nothing crazy. Some 3-day trips, lots of single overnights, and a couple longer routes. I wasn't a survival expert, but I could use a compass, filter water, and read trail maps well enough. I had all the gear I needed. I told myself I could handle being alone. I even looked forward to it. That part still stings looking back. I picked a trail that wasn't too popular. One that wound up through thick forests and steep climbs and eventually dropped down into an old logging basin that had been mostly forgotten. The old maps I downloaded still showed some of the old service roads and trails, but there hadn't been active logging there for decades. I figured it'd be quiet. I wanted that. The first few hours were great. The air smelled like pine and wet dirt, and my boots felt good against the packed trail. I started early in the morning, so the sun was just coming up over the trees when I parked at the base of the trailhead. It was one of those wide gravel roads where grass grew down the middle, telling you that not many tires had rolled over it in a while. There were no other cars. That should have made me pause, but I didn't think twice. The trail started easy, rolling inclines, lots of switchbacks. Birds chirped, a squirrel or two darted across the path. I passed a narrow stream around mid-morning and filtered some water into my bottle. Tasted clean, cold. Felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. Around noon, I came across an old trail marker almost swallowed up by moss and rot. It pointed uphill, toward a narrower trail I hadn't seen on any of the newer maps. I knew where it led though, an old fire lookout tower that was decommissioned years ago. That's where I planned to camp for the night. I had read about it on some forums. Said the view was amazing if you could reach it. The climb started getting tough. Roots snaked across the trail. Trees were thicker, and the sunlight started to thin out. I moved slower, sweating more. I checked my GPS and compass every so often to make sure I was heading in the right direction. But the trail felt like it hadn't been used in years. Branches scraped against my jacket, and twice I had to duck under fallen trees. It didn't feel dangerous, just forgotten. It was around 4 p.m. when I found the clearing. The lookout tower was still standing, though barely. The wood was grayed from the weather, and one of the support beams looked crooked, like something had shifted under it. But the view was insane. Endless trees, layers of them, stretching into the distance with snow-covered peaks on the horizon. I dropped my pack with a deep exhale and sat against a rock, taking it all in. The wind started to pick up, and the temperature dropped fast. I didn't want to sleep inside the tower since it didn't look safe, so I pitched my small tent near the base where the ground was flat and dry. I cooked a quick meal over my stove, ate in silence, and watched the last orange light drain from the sky. I was alone and it was peaceful, but then the quiet got too deep. You know how sometimes you feel a silence that isn't just empty, but expectant? That's what it felt like something was watching, not in the haunted sense, just like I wasn't alone. I brushed it off, zipped up my tent, and crawled into my sleeping bag. I tried to read a bit on my phone, but there was no signal. Eventually, I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. I froze. They were slow, deliberate, and close. Not crunching leaves or snapping twigs, just soft thuds, as if someone was trying to walk quietly on the forest floor. I held my breath and listened. I couldn't see anything. My flashlight was next to my sleeping bag, but I didn't want to turn it on. I didn't want to make a sound. The steps circled my tent once, then again, then nothing. I lay there for what felt like hours, heart pounding in my ears, trying to convince myself it was a deer or maybe the wind messing with branches. But it didn't sound like either. It sounded like boots. When the first light came through the trees, I got up fast, packed my gear, and didn't even bother making breakfast. I just wanted to get out of there. I took a different trail down, a service road that looped east and would reconnect with the main trail in about 4 or 5 miles. I thought it might be quicker and safer. Big mistake. The road was more overgrown than I expected. Tall grass had swallowed most of it, and brambles tugged at my pants. But I pushed through. After about an hour, I reached a clearing where the road split. There were no signs. I checked my map and guessed the left path was right. It looked shorter. Another mistake. The path curved downward fast, and soon it was nothing but loose gravel and wet soil. My boots slipped a few times, and I had to grab at saplings to steady myself. Then I realized something worse. I didn't recognize anything anymore. The trees looked different, thicker. Moss dripped from every branch like wet rags, and the light was nearly gone even though it was just past noon. I looked at my GPS, but it was dead. The battery must have drained overnight. I hadn't turned it off. My compass spun slightly, then settled, but I still couldn't tell where I was. I tried turning back, but everything looked the same. It was like the forest swallowed the road. There were no markers, no distant sounds of traffic or birds, just the wind brushing leaves above me. I kept walking. After maybe 2 more hours, I started to feel watched again. Not just in the paranoid sense, this was sharp, heavy, like something was following but staying just far enough behind not to be seen. I turned often, looked over my shoulder. Nothing. I stopped to drink water, then heard something to my right, like a low grunt, almost human. Not an animal, not a bear. I stood completely still, my breath fogged in the cooler air. The sound didn't repeat. I moved faster. Around late afternoon, I came to a stream. It wasn't on my map, but I knew I had to cross it to keep moving downhill. The banks were slick with mud, and the water was maybe knee-deep at most. I stepped carefully, testing each foot before committing. But halfway across, I slipped. I went down hard, my knee smashing into a rock beneath the water. Pain shot up my leg, and I screamed without meaning to. My pack dragged me sideways, and for a second, I was completely under. I scrambled out, soaked and shivering, and dragged myself onto the other side. That's when I realized I couldn't stand on my leg. I must have sprained it, maybe worse. The joint swelled up fast, and I couldn't put any weight on it without wanting to scream again. My clothes were soaked, and the wind picked up again. I was losing light, and I was lost. I had no choice. I found a small flat area beside the stream and set up my tent again, shaking the whole time. My fingers felt numb. I changed into my dry clothes. Thank God I packed extra, and wrapped my leg in my fleece, tightening it with cord. It didn't help much. That night, the sounds came back. Not footsteps this time. Snapping branches. Breathing. Something big moved around the tent just past midnight. Couldn't sleep. I just lay there, a knife in my hand, listening to the dark close in around me. When morning came, I dragged myself upright and decided to move, leg or no leg. I used a stick as a crutch and pushed forward slowly, gritting my teeth with every step. I rationed food, ate cold oats straight from the bag, drank from the stream. I kept moving. Hours passed, then a day. I slept poorly that night, hearing the same thing, breathing, crunching, always just out of sight. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was out there, not hunting, not attacking, but there. The next morning, I saw it. About 20 feet behind me, standing still between the trees, was a man. He was tall, in ragged clothes, skin smeared with dirt. He didn't move. He just stood there. I didn't yell. I didn't wave. I turned and kept walking. He followed at a distance. Not fast, just steady. I kept moving, even though every part of me was shaking. My knee was screaming. I had run out of food. My water was low. I didn't know how far I'd come or where I was going. But then I heard it. A truck horn. Faint, distant, but real. I turned toward the sound, pushing through thick brush, crawling when I had to. And then, like a curtain pulling back, the trees opened up, and I saw it. A dirt road, a utility truck. I don't think I'll ever go hiking alone again. Not after what happened in the White Bear Hills. I still play it back in my head at night sometimes, not because I want to, but because my brain won't let it go. It started as just a weekend hike, a break, nothing crazy. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to get outside, away from the screens, the noise, and the city. I'd picked the White Bear Hills because it wasn't too far from where I lived. Just about a 3-hour drive north into a quiet stretch of pine and rock, with some clear trails and a few hidden ones if you looked closely. The elevation wasn't anything wild, but the terrain could be rugged in places. It wasn't a tourist magnet, which I liked. Fewer people meant more quiet. That weekend, there weren't many cars at the trailhead. Mine was the only one when I parked Friday morning. I had a rough plan to follow a longer loop trail that branched off into some backcountry, circle around a ridge, then loop back by Sunday evening. I had all my gear packed, GPS watch charged, map printed, compass, enough food and water to get me through. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd done trips in tougher places than this. That might have been part of the problem, a bit too much confidence. The first day was fine, peaceful even. It felt good to breathe pine-scented air again. The weather was cool, skies were clear, and I made decent time on the main trail. I stopped around 4 in the afternoon to make camp in a low clearing near a creek. There was a flat patch of ground surrounded by a mix of fir trees and jagged boulders. I set up my tent, filtered some water, ate a freeze-dried meal, and wrote a few notes in my small journal. That night was quiet, almost too quiet. No wind, no owls, not even bugs. I'd grown up around forests, and even I thought it was odd. I chalked it up to elevation or maybe early autumn shifting things around. Still, I slept okay. The second day is when things started going wrong. I packed up and got moving by 8 a.m. The trail got rougher past the creek with less maintenance. More brush, fallen branches, narrow rock paths. Around midday, I took a wrong turn. I didn't realize it at the time, but I followed what I thought was part of the loop trail. It looked like a trail, faint but visible. It led uphill along a ridgeline. The views got better, so I kept going. My GPS didn't show anything too off. The signal got weaker as I moved deeper into the hills, but I didn't worry yet. Around 3 in the afternoon, I started noticing the markers were gone. No blazes on trees, no cairns, no signs. The trail itself had faded, turning into just broken patches of dirt between rocks. I stopped and took out my map and compass, trying to pinpoint where I was. But the terrain didn't match anything clearly. Just ridge after ridge, rock after rock. It all looked the same. Still, I wasn't panicked. I'd been lost before. You backtrack, look for landmarks, and figure it out. I turned around and started heading back the way I came. Or thought I came. That was the problem. After 20 minutes, I realized I hadn't passed a single spot I recognized. The ridgeline looked identical in both directions. The sky started to dim, and clouds rolled in. Not storm clouds, but thick enough to block sunlight. I picked a spot to make camp, next to a large rock outcrop that I figured I could use as a landmark the next day. I set up my tent again, filtered more creek water I'd found on a lower slope, and ate another meal. This time, the quiet felt heavier, the kind of quiet that sits in your chest. Around 10 p.m., I heard something outside. Not a bear. I know what bears sound like. This was softer, quieter, like someone moving carefully. Step, pause, step, then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited. After what felt like an hour, I finally fell asleep, or blacked out. Hard to tell. The next morning, I checked around the tent. No prints, no claw marks, nothing looked touched. I told myself it was just wind shifting branches, but there was no wind. I packed up fast and got moving early. I used my compass and tried heading west, figuring I'd eventually hit the main loop or a service road. The hills were steeper than I remembered, and the brush got thicker. My legs started to cramp from pushing through undergrowth and climbing over granite shelves. By noon, I was sweating hard and running low on water. That's when I found the first pile of rocks. It wasn't natural. About knee-high, a perfect little cone of stones, each one carefully stacked. Not a cairn. Too neat, too deliberate, and no trail near it. Just thick brush and more hills. I walked around it, took a wide arc, didn't touch it. I kept moving west. An hour later, I found another one. Same shape, same size, same clean stacking. No prints, no broken twigs around it. It was just there, sitting in the middle of nowhere. My gut twisted a little. I'd seen signs of survival camps before, emergency shelters, signs of hunters, trail markers. This wasn't that. By evening, I hadn't found a road or trail, just more rocks, more dead trees. The air smelled different, faintly sour, like wet bark left to rot in the sun. I stopped near a dry creek bed and set up my tent again. My legs ached, my back felt tight. I was tired but too on edge to sleep. That night I heard it again. This time it was closer, the same slow steps, just outside the tent. Then a dragging sound, not animal-like, more like cloth scraping rock. I held my breath, every muscle in my body locked up. The steps stopped inches from the tent wall. Then nothing. I waited. Eventually I passed out again. Don't know when. Just remember waking up soaked in sweat and cold. The tent was fine, still zipped, no damage. No footprints again. But about 20 feet away, there was another stone pile. This one was bigger, waist high, same perfect cone shape, just sitting there like it had been built overnight, like someone wanted me to see it. I didn't pack up. I just grabbed my bag, left the tent, and started moving west. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I figured I'd hit a service road or fire road if I just kept going. My legs were jelly, but I forced them to keep moving. By mid-afternoon, I hit a marshy stretch. Boggy ground, soaked boots. My map was useless by then. I'd burned too much energy and food. I had maybe half a liter of water left. I sat on a log and just stared at my boots. That's when I saw movement. Not close. On a ridge maybe 100 yards away. Just a flicker, like something ducked behind a tree. No sound, just motion. I stared for a long time. Nothing came out. The silence made it worse. I got up and moved again. Didn't stop for hours. Every few ridges, I saw more of the stone piles. Different sizes now. Some tall, some flat. Always neat. Always perfect. Never disturbed. They were following me or I was following them. Hard to say. That night, I didn't set up a tent. I curled under a low rock shelf with my jacket pulled tight. I didn't eat. I barely drank. Just waited for daylight. When the sun rose, I moved fast. Legs shaking, feet blistered. My GPS blinked on for a few seconds around 10 a.m., and I saw a marker for a fire road. Still a few miles away. I pushed hard. Ignored the pain. Took 4 hours, but I made it. The road was barely visible. Just a thin dirt line through trees. But it was real. I followed it west until I found an old forestry cabin. Boarded up, no vehicles, but there was a rusted water tank and a bench. I sat, drank the last of my water. Late afternoon, I heard an engine. A quad bike, probably a Ranger. I stood and waved like crazy. The guy stopped, stared at me for a second, then rode over. I didn't say much, just that I'd gotten lost. He nodded and gave me a ride back to the main station. I didn't mention the stone piles. I got back to my car that evening. It had been untouched, dusty but fine. I drove straight home. Didn't even stop for gas until I hit the highway. That was 6 months ago. I haven't hiked since. Haven't even unpacked my gear. Sometimes I think about going back, just to find that loop trail again and see where I went wrong. But every time I do, I remember the stone piles, and the footsteps, and how they were getting closer every night. I don't know what pushed me to try that Scree Ridge Trail in late October. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was pride, or maybe I just wanted to get away from everything for a while. Whatever the reason, I had been hiking alone for years, and I thought I had a decent understanding of my limits. I had done high-altitude treks, steep forest climbs, and long multi-day hikes through dry, exposed land. But nothing prepared me for the stretch of trail that almost became the last place I ever saw. It started simple, like most bad decisions do. I was in Montana, near the southern edge of the Beartooth Mountains. I just wrapped up a 3-day solo loop that took me around some glacial lakes, and I had one extra day before I had to drive back. That's when I noticed a small line on the topographic map I hadn't paid attention to before. It was a ridge trail, narrow, steep, unmaintained. A shortcut across a stretch of high scree with incredible views, or so the map promised. Most people avoided it, especially this late in the season, but I figured it would be manageable. The weather had held steady for a week, and the clouds looked thin. I had proper boots, warm layers, a solid pack, and years of experience. I thought I'd knock it out in a day and be back in my car before sundown. I didn't tell anyone I was changing my plan. That was mistake number 1. The trail started from a side fork that peeled away from the main route near a place called Granite Point. There wasn't much signage, just an old wooden post with faded paint, half of it snapped off. The path narrowed quickly, turning from packed dirt into loose shale that crackled under my boots. It was obvious this wasn't a maintained trail anymore. Grass pushed up through some of the rocks, and a few switchbacks were barely carved into the hillside. But I pushed forward. The first couple hours were fine. The sun sat low in the sky, casting warm orange light over the slopes. I felt alone, but not in a bad way, just far away from people and their noise. The wind blew steady across the ridges, and small birds darted in and out of low bushes. Every step kicked up little slides of gravel, but I moved carefully. The trail followed a sharp incline up a rocky saddle and then dropped me onto the spine of the ridge. From there, I could see miles in every direction. Pine-covered slopes rolled off to the west. To the east, wide valleys dipped into canyons full of shadow. And behind me, the last signs of the trailhead and other hikers were long gone. The ridge looked like a crumbling backbone. Jagged boulders jutted from both sides, and the path narrowed until it was just a foot-wide line of compacted dirt and rock fragments. The drop-offs on either side were steep and long, at least a few hundred feet down to rock fields. But I had good balance, and I knew how to move slow. I'd done ridge walks before. The sun dropped a little lower. I figured I was halfway through when I reached the first real trouble. Ahead of me was a section of scree that looked off, not just loose, but freshly disturbed. The slope was steep, and I saw small chunks of stone tumbling now and then. The trail itself curved right along the edge, forced onto the scree with nowhere else to go. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. I told myself it would hold. I moved carefully, testing each step. My boots slid a little with each movement, sending stones skipping down the slope. I used my hiking poles, planting them deep to keep my balance. The incline was brutal. It forced me to lean forward, weight low, crawling almost. There was no vegetation here, just gray rock and sharp fragments, like broken glass scattered across a tilted table. About halfway across the scree field, the trail vanished. It didn't fade or fork. It just disappeared. 1 minute I was on a solid line of rock, and the next I was staring at a wide slope of nothing but loose gravel, sloping steeply down to a mess of boulders below. The dirt path had clearly been washed out by a rock slide, probably recently, maybe in the last few weeks. There was no detour, no alternate route, just the sharp drop to my right and a near-vertical slope above me. I crouched low and looked around. The only option I had was to traverse forward over the unstable scree, hoping it held long enough for me to reach the far side where the trail might pick up again. So I moved, slow, careful, sliding more than stepping. Each time I shifted my weight, the ground under me gave a little. I kept my eyes forward and tried not to look at the slope below. My hands started shaking, not from the cold, but from the slow realization that this had become serious. Then I heard it, a low crunch, not from me but from the slope above. A line of rocks tumbled down, fast and loud, bouncing off bigger slabs and spraying gravel as they went. I froze. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked up just in time to see a crack open across the upper ridge wall. A line of dust sprayed out like mist. Then the rock slide began. I ran, not in the full sprint kind of way, but in the wild, panic stumble you do when everything in your body says move. I tried to angle toward the far side of the scree, hoping to make it to the other side of the break. But the ground went soft under me. Stones gave way. I fell forward, sliding on my knees, my palms scraping over the rock. I made it maybe 20 feet before the slide reached me. It wasn't a wall of rocks like in the movies. It was a wave of movement, a sudden shift where the entire surface began to flow beneath me like gravel in a sand timer. I lost both trekking poles. One boot got jammed between two stones, and I had to twist hard to get free. I tumbled forward and slammed into a half-buried boulder. My shoulder cracked against it and pain shot down my arm. My backpack slammed up against my neck. I rolled once, twice, then managed to dig my fingers into a clutch of exposed roots from a bush growing out of a tiny crack in the rock. And then, stillness. The slide moved past me, continuing downslope, kicking dust into the air. I stayed there for a long time, breathing hard, heart pounding. The pain in my shoulder got worse every second. I could barely lift the arm. My knees were cut open through my pants. My hands were raw and shaking. When I finally stood up, I realized my ankle hurt too. Not broken, but twisted. Every step sent a sharp sting through my lower leg. I limped forward. The trail was gone. I scanned the slope and eventually found a faint line of dirt far ahead, near a bend in the ridge. But to reach it, I had to cross the rest of the slide. There was no other choice. Climbing back the way I came would be suicidal. The ground behind me had shifted too much. The rocks had rearranged everything. It took an hour to cover maybe 50 yards. Each step was slow. I kept my weight low, testing every bit of ground. The pain in my ankle made it worse. My shoulder throbbed constantly. I could only use one hiking pole now. The other had vanished in the fall. When I finally reached the other side, I collapsed onto the dirt trail. My body was shaking. I felt dizzy. I drank half my water and forced myself to eat something. Protein bar, dry and chalky. It took everything I had not to just lie down and sleep. But I wasn't done yet. I checked my phone. No signal. I checked the time. It was 4:11 p.m. I had maybe 2.5 hours of light left, maybe less. The clouds were thicker now, and the temperature had dropped fast. I stood and kept moving. The ridge narrowed even more ahead. On one side, sheer rock walls. On the other, exposed drop-offs. I moved slower than before, limping, watching the clouds shift. The wind had picked up and was colder now, sharper. It whistled through the cracks and carried fine dust with it. My jacket wasn't enough anymore. I had a thermal layer, but I was sweating from the effort, and I knew stopping would chill me fast. My body was running on fear and adrenaline, but I could feel the edge of exhaustion creeping in. Around 5:30, the light dipped below the western ridge. Shadows swallowed everything. The trail dipped sharply into a rocky draw between two outcrops, and that's when I slipped again. My bad foot missed the edge of a rock, and I went down hard. I rolled onto my back and couldn't move for a few minutes. My side hurt. My elbow was bleeding through the jacket. And when I stood, I realized I'd landed on my water bladder. It had split. The inside of my pack was soaked, and the last of my water was gone. That was the moment I knew I might not make it out. Not because I was dying or anything, just because I'd made one too many mistakes. No one knew I was here. There was no cell service. I was injured. I was out of water, and the light was going fast. But I wasn't going to die on that mountain. I pushed forward. The trail dropped sharply for a mile or so, zigzagging through talus and broken stone. I followed a dry stream bed, hoping it would lead to a lower elevation. My ankle was getting worse. Each step was like driving a nail into the joint. I was sweating and freezing at the same time, teeth chattering even though I was moving. Finally, around 7 p.m., just as the sky turned black, I saw something that gave me hope, a rock cairn. Not just one, but a line of them. I've done a lot of solo hiking trips over the years. It started as a way to escape city noise and the stress of daily life. I always liked the peace of nature, the stillness of the trees, and the rhythm of my own footsteps. I wasn't a thrill seeker. I didn't go looking for risk or danger. I just liked being alone out there, with my backpack, my trail shoes, and a plan that I stuck to every time. But what happened on my trip to the mountains near Thompson River changed everything. That hike wasn't like the others. I wasn't the same after it. I had picked a trail I hadn't tried before. It was in British Columbia, just outside a small town I'd passed through once during a road trip. The place was quiet, and I found a trail on a hiking app with decent reviews and a moderate difficulty rating. It was called Canyon Ridge Loop. The reviews said it had some great views, some narrow climbs, but nothing too technical. It looped around a small mountain ridge, followed a river for a bit, and curved back toward the parking lot. The full loop was about 16 kilometers. That was perfect for a full-day solo hike. I arrived early in the morning. The parking lot was empty except for one pickup truck. It was chilly mid-September, and the trees had already started to turn color. I had packed my usual gear: a full water bladder in my backpack, protein bars, a small first aid kit, flashlight, compass, map printout, power bank, and my phone. I had a sharp folding knife I always carried, just in case. I wore trail shoes instead of boots, and I had a light jacket tied around my waist. The trail started simple, wide, and well-marked. I followed it through the trees, up toward the first lookout point, which sat above a narrow canyon where the river carved its way through stone. The view was stunning. It was the kind of thing that reminded me why I loved hiking alone. I stayed there a while, took a few photos, ate half a protein bar, and kept moving. The trail narrowed as it curved along the edge of the ridge, but nothing felt risky, just quiet. About 2 hours in, the path forked unexpectedly. This wasn't on the map I had printed. One path continued up the ridge, toward what looked like a bald summit. The other path, narrower with no trail marker, sloped down through a dense patch of pines. It looked like it had been used before. Not a game trail, but not maintained either. I should have stuck to the main trail. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I wanted to explore a bit more off the beaten track. I had plenty of daylight left. I was confident in my gear, and I figured I could turn around if it looked sketchy. So I stepped off the main loop and took the narrow path downward. First, it was fine. The trail dipped gently, weaving between thick trees, with patches of moss and dead needles underfoot. There were no trail blazes, no footprints that I could see. I kept checking the sun through the trees to stay oriented. The path kept going downhill and curved left, away from the ridge. Eventually, the forest started to change. The pines gave way to thicker undergrowth, low shrubs, and tangled roots. The ground was soft in places, soggy in others. It was clear this wasn't part of any maintained loop. About 30 minutes down that way, I knew I had made a mistake. I hadn't seen a marker, a sign, or a clearing. I paused, took a drink from my pack, and opened my map. Of course, there was no mention of a split or side trail. I checked my phone. No signal. The GPS dot was showing, but the trail didn't exist on the app either. I should have turned back right then. But instead, I convinced myself it would reconnect to the loop at some point. Maybe it was an older trail that people had stopped using. I told myself it would meet the river section eventually, and I'd recognize something from the reviews. I kept going. The trail got worse. The trees crowded in, the air got thicker, and the slope became uneven. I started slipping a little, catching myself on trees. The sun was still out, but I couldn't see it as clearly anymore. Everything looked the same: trees, roots, wet moss. I didn't feel like I was in danger yet, but I didn't like how far I'd gone without seeing anything familiar. About another 20 minutes down the trail, I heard something. Not an animal, but a noise that didn't belong. It was a dull thump, Not a snap of a branch, not birds. A low, flat thud, like something heavy falling into soft ground. I froze. I didn't see anything, didn't smell anything strange. The noise didn't repeat. I waited a bit longer, then slowly moved ahead. That's when I noticed the forest floor ahead was muddy. Really muddy. The trail, if you could still call it that, dipped into a shallow ravine where water had collected. It looked like something had stepped through it recently. I saw prints, or something like prints. Not boots, not hooves, just wide, shallow holes, like the ground had been stomped in by something big and heavy. I stopped moving. There weren't any claw marks, no definite shape, but I didn't like the way it looked. The area was too quiet. No wind, no birds. The whole place felt off. I decided I had gone far enough. I turned back. The trail wasn't as clear on the way up. I was sweating, legs burning a bit, and I realized the slope was steeper than it had felt coming down. I tried retracing my steps, looking for the same fallen log, the same rock with moss. I found some of them, others I wasn't sure. I kept moving fast, though not running, but keeping up a strong pace to get back to the fork. I kept checking the compass and sun, trying to match where I came from. Then I saw something that stopped me cold. It was a shirt, not mine. It was faded red, torn, hanging off a branch, about chest height, like it had been caught and ripped off someone. It was old, dirty, and damp. It had clearly been there a while. That trail didn't feel random anymore. I moved past it, heart pounding. I kept climbing, focusing hard on the ground ahead of me. About 5 minutes later, I came to a small clearing with a large, flat rock. I didn't remember passing it on the way down. That's when it hit me. I was lost. I tried not to panic. I sat down on the rock, took another drink, and pulled out my phone. Still no signal. I pulled up the GPS again. The blue dot showed me somewhere south of the original trail, far off the main loop. There was no trail line showing where I was, just forest. I decided to backtrack again, even slower this time, looking for anything I recognized. I moved down the hill again, hoping I'd accidentally passed the right spot earlier. I was watching the ground so closely that I didn't realize until it was too late. I stepped wrong and my foot slipped on a wet root. My leg shot out and I landed hard on my side. My ribs hit a rock and my ankle twisted sharply under me. Pain shot up my leg. I lay there for a second, gasping. My backpack had softened the fall, but my ankle throbbed immediately. I sat up, gritting my teeth, and tried to put weight on it. Sharp, burning pain. I leaned against a tree and tested it again. I could stand, barely, but I couldn't walk right. I knew right then I wasn't going to make it back quickly. That's when the sun started going down. The forest dimmed quickly under the canopy. I pulled out my flashlight, turned it on, and kept limping uphill, hoping to find the trail again. Everything looked the same. Every tree, every patch of moss. I passed the red shirt again, but this time I went a different way. I didn't want to see it anymore. After another hour of slow limping, I gave up. Couldn't find the fork. My ankle was getting worse. I didn't want to move and risk making it worse or falling again. So I stopped near a tree with a wide base, cleared some ground, and sat down to wait out the night. I knew the temperature would drop, but I had a jacket, and I'd wrapped my ankle as tightly as I could using a shirt from my pack. I kept the flashlight on low and tried to stay calm. All night I heard things, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. Once, I heard something big move through the brush, maybe 30 feet away. I didn't move. I just held my knife and kept the light on in that direction. I didn't sleep. When the sun finally came up, I was already standing, ready to move again. I hadn't eaten much, just sipped water through the night. My body ached, but I was focused. I had to climb uphill. That was my only plan. I figured if I kept going north and slightly east, I'd hit the main trail or the ridge. I hobbled uphill for hours. The pain in my ankle was bad, but not unbearable. I kept going step by step. I stopped to rest often, drank slowly, and forced myself to eat some food. I didn't see anything familiar until early afternoon. That's when I spotted a trail marker on a tree, fresh paint, bright orange. I almost cried when I saw it. I followed it slowly, and within 10 minutes, I was back on the main loop. I recognized the ridge edge. I even saw the same flat overlook rock from the morning before. I kept walking, slower now but steady, until I saw the parking lot in the distance. My car was the only one left. I sat inside for a long time before I started it. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there, staring at the trees. I don't usually talk about this, not because I'm ashamed, but because it still makes my chest tighten every time I think about it. That trip changed me in ways I didn't expect. It didn't make me afraid of the outdoors. I still hike, but it made me hyper-aware of how quickly a peaceful place can turn against you. I learned the hard way that it's not always the weather, animals, or terrain that pose the biggest threat. Sometimes it's people. It happened 3 summers ago. I had a week off work and decided to take a solo backpacking trip in a national forest I hadn't explored before. I won't say the name of the place, but it was in the northern Rockies, remote, beautiful, and not as crowded as the more popular parks. That was part of the appeal. I didn't want packed trails or loud campers. I wanted peace, quiet, and solitude. I planned for a 5-day loop trail that covered about 40 miles. I'd start at a ranger-maintained trailhead, go up into the high ridges, make camp at a few alpine lakes, and loop back down into the valley through some forested areas. I brought a good GPS unit, a paper map, compass, and a week's worth of dehydrated food. I had a reliable tent, water filter, sleeping pad, and a bear canister. I checked weather reports for the week. It looked dry, maybe a few clouds. Nights would be cool but manageable. I left a note with my brother, marked the full route, and let him know I'd check in by Sunday night. I parked at the trailhead on a Tuesday morning, arriving just after sunrise. There were 2 other cars in the lot, both dusty like they'd been there for days. It was quiet, and the trailhead registry showed only a couple names in the past week. I signed in, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The air was crisp, pine-scented, and there was that dry crunch of trail dust under my boots. For the first few miles, everything felt perfect. The trail climbed steadily through thick pine forest, then broke into open meadows. Wildflowers were in bloom, yellow balsam root, purple lupin, red Indian paintbrush. I stopped to drink water near a creek, filtering and refilling my bottles. Later, I passed into a rocky area where the trees thinned out and the sky opened wide. I could see the ridgeline I'd be crossing the next day. My legs felt strong. My pack sat right. There were no bugs. It was one of those days where everything just works. That first night, I camped by a lake near the base of the ridge. It was silent, not even wind. The lake was glassy, reflecting the dark pines around it. I set up my tent, cooked a small meal, and stashed my bear canister away from camp. I wrote in my trail journal, took some pictures, and crawled into my sleeping bag just after sunset. I slept deeply. On the second day, I crossed the ridge. It was a rough, exposed trail, full of loose scree and steep switchbacks. The sun was hot, and there wasn't much shade. I passed some goat tracks and saw a herd high up on the cliff face, watching me like statues. When I reached the top, I sat and looked out over miles of forested valleys and snow-capped peaks. I didn't see a single person the whole day. That night, I camped at another alpine lake, smaller than the first one, tucked into a rocky bowl. I remember thinking it looked like something from a postcard, but that night, something started to feel off. It's hard to describe. Nothing obvious, just a feeling like I wasn't alone. I brushed it off as nerves. I knew being alone in the wilderness could mess with your head, especially if you weren't used to it. But I'd done plenty of solo trips before and never had that crawling sensation like I did that night. Still, I didn't see anyone. No animals, no sounds. Just wind scraping across the rocks and the distant trickle of the lake's outflow. The next morning, things got strange. I packed up camp and followed the trail down toward the next section, a denser forest that sloped into a wide basin. As I walked, I noticed something in the dirt ahead. A boot print, fresh, deep, not mine. Someone else had walked this way recently. That's not unusual, but I hadn't seen any sign of others since the parking lot. I stopped, crouched, and looked closely. It was from a heavy boot, the kind with thick tread, maybe a size 11 or 12. Judging from the depth, the person was bigger than me. I kept going, spotting more prints here and there. They followed the same trail as me, heading into the basin. After a few miles, I took a break near a creek. I was filtering water when I noticed something about 50 yards downstream. A flat spot with flattened grass and what looked like a small pile of gear. I squinted. There was definitely something there. It looked like an old tarp and some junk scattered around. Maybe a camp. I thought about walking down to check it out, but something stopped me. I couldn't explain it. My stomach tightened. I suddenly didn't want to be seen, so I finished filtering and quietly moved on. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing near a stream where I planned to camp. I pitched my tent and ate a cold dinner since I didn't feel like cooking. I sat with my back against a tree, staring at the canopy above me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every crack of a twig made me jump. I kept telling myself I was being stupid, just nerves, but it felt different this time, more real. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in my tent, heart thudding with every sound outside. Wind, branches, something moving through the underbrush. Could have been a deer, a fox, but it kept circling, stopping, moving again. Too heavy to be a rabbit or small animal. I clutched my knife in one hand inside my sleeping bag. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up with sunlight hitting the fabric of my tent. I stepped out, stretched, and did a quick scan of my surroundings. That's when I noticed it. A cigarette butt, right near a rock 10 feet from my tent, still smelling like tobacco. I don't smoke. I hadn't seen anyone for days. The nearest road was over 15 miles away. Whoever left that had been here recently, possibly last night, maybe while I was sleeping. I felt ice in my stomach. I packed up faster than I ever had before. Every part of me was on alert. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just filtered water and got moving. I made the decision to cut the trip short. My loop was supposed to continue south, but there was a side trail that curved back toward the northern section and could shave off a full day. It wasn't marked on my GPS, but it showed on my paper map. It would be a longer hike that day, maybe 15 miles, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be closer to the trailhead and back within range of other people, maybe even cell service. As I moved through the thick forest, I kept checking behind me. I didn't see anyone, but I found more footprints. They weren't all in one line either. Sometimes they cut across the trail, looped off into the woods, then came back. Like someone had been walking off-trail, paralleling me. I stopped for lunch near a small meadow and sat on a log, chewing a protein bar. That's when I saw it. On the far side of the meadow, half hidden behind some trees, was a figure. Not moving, just standing there. I froze. I couldn't make out details, just the outline of a tall man, wearing a dark jacket or hoodie. He wasn't walking, just watching. No movement, no gesture, just still. I didn't wave, didn't call out. I just stood up, slowly slung my pack over my shoulder, and walked back to the trail without looking back. I didn't run, though every nerve in me screamed to. I didn't want to trigger a chase. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. I kept moving, barely stopping for water. Every sound in the woods made my skin crawl. I didn't know who that person was, what they wanted, or how long they'd been following me. But I knew one thing: they weren't hiking for fun. I made it to a ridge that overlooked the northern valley. The trail curved along a steep slope with thick forest on both sides. I had about 5 more miles to go until I reached a campsite near a small ranger cabin that was supposed to be locked but occasionally used for supply drops. I figured that would be my best bet. But when I got to the site, I saw something that nearly made me drop my pack. A second tent was already there. A dirty, ripped, olive green dome tent. No car, no gear outside, just the tent. I stopped 100 feet away, crouched behind some brush, and watched. Nothing, no movement. But then, a figure stepped out from the trees behind it. Same man, I was sure. Tall, black jacket, same posture. He didn't go into the tent, just walked around it, then disappeared into the woods again. I didn't go to the cabin. I turned around and backtracked 2 miles until I found a narrow deer trail that led up to a small rocky bluff. I climbed up, found a flat spot, and made camp in the most hidden place I could find. I didn't start a fire. I didn't cook. I ate trail mix with shaky hands and set up my tent behind a big boulder, barely visible from below. That night, I didn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the rocks below. Slow, deliberate, then silence. At some point, I must have passed out from exhaustion because the next thing I remember, I've been hiking solo for years. It started as a way to clear my mind after long work weeks, but over time, it became more than that. It became a need. I never went out looking for adventure or anything crazy. I just liked being out there, away from the noise, surrounded by trees, dirt, and wind. Just me and nature. This story happened in the fall of 2022, in the southeastern part of Washington state. There's a trail system in the Blue Mountains that I'd been wanting to explore. Most people stick to the main areas with marked trails, but I'd seen some older maps online that showed a cutoff trail that looped deep into the forest and came back around toward the main ridgeline. It wasn't on newer maps, and some people in hiking forums said it was overgrown or washed out, but a few said it was still passable if you were careful. That was enough for me. I figured I'd hike out 2 nights, camp once off the main trail, then take the cutoff back and finish the loop. I packed light but thorough. My usual gear, tent, sleeping bag, emergency beacon, extra batteries, water purifier, trail mix, a basic med kit, and my hunting knife. I had a paper map with the cutoff trail marked and a compass. I also had my phone with offline GPS, but I never really trusted it deep in the woods. Batteries die. Signals get lost. I'd learned to rely on the basics. The first day went fine. I parked at a small pull-off near the trailhead early in the morning and started out. It was chilly, but the climb warmed me up quickly. The trail was quiet, with only a few people coming back the opposite way, probably finishing a weekend trip. I kept to myself and made steady progress, reaching a small clearing with flat ground around 4:30 in the afternoon. That was where I set up camp for the night. It was peaceful, too peaceful, maybe. The wind barely moved the trees. I heard no birds, no rustling. I didn't think too much of it at the time, just enjoyed the silence. I had some food, watched the sun dip behind the ridge, and fell asleep early. The next morning, I packed up fast and headed toward the spot where the cutoff trail was supposed to split off. It wasn't obvious, but I knew the general area. After about an hour of hiking, I saw what looked like an old wooden signpost, broken and faded, with no sign on it anymore. To the left of the trail, the forest opened up slightly, and I saw what might have once been a trail. It looked like a deer path now, narrow, overgrown, but heading in the right direction. I decided to go for it. For the first couple of hours, the trail was faint but followable. I moved slower, keeping an eye on the ground and trees for any markers, old cut logs, or signs of past traffic. Every so often, I'd see a small rock pile or a notch in a tree that looked unnatural. It reassured me that this was once a trail, even if nature had nearly taken it back. After lunch, things got harder. The underbrush thickened. Down trees blocked the path, and I had to climb over or detour around them. My legs started to get scratched up, and I could feel sweat soaking into my shirt. The air got more humid the deeper I went, and it smelled different, damp, heavy, like rot. I tried to ignore it and kept pushing. Then I saw the first animal carcass. It was a deer, or had been. What was left of it was bones and scraps of fur, half buried in the mud. I stopped for a moment, checked for bear prints, but didn't see any. Still, I took out my knife and kept it in hand. I wasn't scared yet, just cautious. That's how it is out there. You stay alert. Not even 15 minutes later, I saw another one, this time a raccoon or something like it. Same thing. Bones, bits of fur, flies buzzing around. This one was newer, though. I didn't like it. I started getting that feeling in my stomach. The one where something doesn't feel right, but you can't put your finger on it. The trail had curved down into a small ravine, and the sun barely came through the trees. I checked the time. It was only 2:10 p.m., but the shadows made it feel later. The air was still. No birds, No squirrels, just dead quiet. I pushed on. By 3:30, I realized I wasn't following a trail anymore. I'd lost it somewhere back in the undergrowth. I tried doubling back, looking for broken twigs or footprints, but everything looked the same. My GPS was useless, spinning in circles. The map and compass were all I had, but without clear landmarks, they didn't help much either. I wasn't panicking yet, but I could feel the pressure starting. I decided to keep heading east, where the main ridgeline should be. I figured if I kept a straight line, I'd eventually hit the ridge trail again. Easier said than done in thick forest. Around 4:10, I started feeling watched. It's hard to explain that feeling unless you've experienced it. Like eyes on your back. Every step felt louder than it should. I stopped several times and looked around. Nothing, just trees. I even stood still for a full minute, waiting to hear something, anything, but it was silent. Too silent. I tried to shake it off, but the unease grew. I started walking faster, brushing branches aside, scraping my arms and legs. The terrain got rougher, steeper hills, more mud, fewer breaks in the trees. I didn't want to be stuck out here after dark. Then I found the camp. It was just off a slope, behind a dense patch of trees. A small flat area with a rusted-out tent frame, half covered in moss. A few broken camping supplies were scattered. An old pot, some rotted nylon straps, and the melted remains of a boot. I don't know how long it had been there, but it wasn't recent. Still, something about it made my heart beat faster. It wasn't just the decay. It was the way everything seemed abandoned in a hurry, like someone left and never came back. I didn't linger. I pushed past it, but the trees started to close in tighter. Every direction looked the same. My legs were shaking from effort and stress. The daylight started to fade. I didn't want to stop and camp again, but I had no choice. I found a slightly raised patch of ground near a fallen tree and set up my tent. I ate a few handfuls of trail mix and drank filtered water from a muddy stream nearby. Tasted off. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing faint noises, cracks, rustles, soft thuds. I told myself it was animals, wind, the forest shifting. But there was no wind, just that same heavy, still air. Once, around 2 a.m., I thought I heard something outside the tent. Slow steps, then silence. I held my knife and didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited. Nothing happened. When light finally came, I packed up and started moving immediately. I didn't eat, just walked. My legs were sore, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I thought about using the emergency beacon, but I wanted to try one more time to find the ridge. By 10 a.m., I knew I was in trouble. I'd been walking uphill, trying to reach higher ground for a better view. But every time I thought I was near the top, another slope appeared. I started seeing things. Flashes of movement through the trees, shapes that disappeared the second I looked. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down I wasn't sure. At 11:15, I found the tree. It was massive, split down the middle like it had been struck by lightning, though there were no burn marks. And nailed into the base was a rusty metal sign with no words, just deep vertical scratches across it. 5 long gouges. I stared at it, feeling cold despite the heat. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a warning. That's when I heard it. Not an animal, not wind. A low, distant crunch like something stepping on branches. Slow, steady, not close yet, but coming. I didn't wait. I ran. No direction, just away. I don't know how far I went, maybe a mile, maybe 2. I was slipping on mud, crashing through ferns, panting so hard my throat burned. When I finally stopped, I dropped to the ground, heart pounding. Nothing behind me, silence again. That was when I saw the orange tape. It was tied around a tree, then another, and another. Trail markers, real ones. I followed them. It took me over an hour, but I finally stumbled out onto a real trail. Why, maintained. I cried when I saw it. I didn't even know I was crying until I wiped my face. I followed the trail another 2 miles before it connected with the main ridgeline. From there, I backtracked to the trailhead, reaching my car just before sundown. My legs were cramping. My face was scratched. My clothes were soaked in sweat and mud, but I was out. I sat in the car for almost half an hour before I could drive. I didn't tell anyone the full story. I just said I got lost on an old trail and had to bushwhack my way back. People nodded, said it happens. But there was something out there. I never saw it, but I felt it. Something that watches, that waits. I haven't been back since. I still hike, but I stick to marked trails now. And I never, ever follow cut-off paths again.